Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today for the first installment of our Advocacy webinar series. My name is Jack Marsden. I'm IFMA's Marketing and Communications Specialist. In this new series, IFMA's Executive Director of Government Affairs, Jeff Johnson, will be sharing best practices for making your voice heard by your elected officials, drawing from his many years of experience on the Hill, working with the United States Congress in Washington, D.C. You also get a situation report on the current political climate and how the future of FM may or may not be affected. But before we get started, please share with us in the live chat where you're tuning in from. We'd love to see all the different places around the world where you're hoping to make a positive impact for the FM profession. I'm personally coming to you live from New York City this morning. As you get those messages into our live chat, I'd like to invite our panelists today onto the stage. Please welcome Jeff Johnson and Brian Vickers. Thanks so much for joining us this morning, Jeff.
Good morning, Jack, and thank you for teeing that up. It's great to be here with you this morning, and we appreciate Brian joining us from PACE as well. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jeff Johnson, IFMA's Executive Director of Government Affairs based here in Washington, D.C. I'm joined by Brian Vickers from PACE LLP. Brian and PACE have worked for IFMA for longer than I've been with the organization, for I think more than 20 years now. So fortunate to have Brian on our team here to have their expertise as we navigate the increasingly choppy waters here in Washington. First, I do want to provide an apology and a little context. We're doing this as a webinar instead of having our in-person event. Our advocacy forum, as many of you know, was scheduled for October, but unfortunately, due to the government shutdown, we had to transpose that into a virtual event. So this is a series of what we hope will be 3 or 4 webinars that will take place over the course of the next 6 months that will cover not only the content that we were going to address in person in Washington, but also keep our chapters in the U.S. and around the world up to date on everything IFMA is working on from a government affairs perspective. And so with that, let me just jump in here. First and foremost, there's a lot to cover from a government affairs perspective in the U.S. And I'm fortunate that we have a strong team, both from our IFMA professional staff based in Houston, as well as our volunteer committee and chapter leaders, and then the consultants that work with us here in the U.S. And then in Europe as well. In the U.S., as I mentioned, we have Brian Vickers and Scott Dacey from PACE. Brian, why don't I let you introduce yourself and PACE real quick before we jump into the rest of the program here?
Thanks, JJ. So Brian Vickers with PACE, and it's been my pleasure to work with IFMA and Jeff and the team for well over a decade. Also with our team is Scott Dacey. He's our managing partner and sets up many of our when the fly-ins occur and folks come into town. Sets up many of our speaking engagements with members of Congress. And unfortunately, he is conflicted today, so he's unable to attend. But happy to be here as part of the team representing PACE, and appreciate IFMA for all their support of our organization and our joint efforts to push forward the Facility Management Association on Capitol Hill.
Thank you, Brian, for being here and for all the work that you and PACE do. I did want to give a particular shout out to our volunteer leaders as well. Lena Thompson, who is the chair of our Government Affairs Committee, Darren Rose from the International Board, who is vice chair of the committee, and Nick Haven, also from the International Board, who is the board liaison from the Government Affairs Committee. In addition to those from the International Board, we also have chapter leaders around the country and around the world that are engaged and very helpful in supporting IFMA's government affairs efforts. It really is a big effort. It takes a lot of engagement, a lot of volunteer support, and a lot of subject matter expertise. So we thank everyone for being here, for being interested in IFMA's advocacy program, and for being part of the solution. Just to provide a little context, IFMA's government affairs program is truly global in nature. We have our U.S. federal program that is based here in Washington. We have an increasing number of members and chapters who are engaged in state and local advocacy at either the state level, the local level, the municipal level, and we're very excited to see that. I do want to point out that when we talk about advocacy, we're not just talking about engaging with government officials. Advocacy really means being an advocate for the FM profession, helping people, whether it's an elected official, whether it's a business leader, whether it's a member of your family, a friend, a colleague, understand who you are, what you do, and why it's important. The more people really understand the role and impact of FM, the greater impact we can have as an organization. And it really just builds our credibility and builds knowledge about the FM profession. So we're very curious and hopeful to support that moving forward. In addition to the work we're doing here in the US, we have a very active program in the European Union based in Brussels. We're doing some work in Canada. We're doing work in Asia Pacific, and we're also doing work in Africa and the Middle East. And it's remarkable, working in these various different markets to see the commonalities, to see the things that are very similar working in very different markets. When you look at the way governments approach facility management, if you look at what they're expecting in terms of energy performance, building health and safety, economic growth and productivity, they're very similar goals and very similar challenges. So IFMA is able to come to that conversation with a global perspective and global resources and really help share best practices, just as we do with everything throughout the built environment. No matter where IFMA is doing work, the goals that we have are the same. First and foremost, we want to empower our members to connect them and share their subject matter expertise with decision makers and stakeholders. We want to make sure that as our elected officials are developing policy and passing legislation that impacts the built environment, that we're providing information, subject matter expertise. As I always say, our elected officials are fully capable of making decisions, without our input, without our expertise. But we really prefer that they have informed perspective and know how the decisions they make are going to impact the industries that they're regulating. So in order to do that, we're always working to introduce IFMA and FM. We're meeting with elected officials, in DC on a regular basis and global capitals on a regular basis. And it really does help them to put a face to the name and understand who our members are and what they do. As part of that effort, we're working to expand government partnerships. As you'll see on the next slide, IFMA has a large and growing list of government partners that we're working with. This list of government partners and the introductions and the empowerment we're providing creates value for IFMA members. One of the things we hear a lot from our members is, when we ask what we can do to be helpful, they say, please tell my boss how important I am. Please tell them how important my role as an FM is. And obviously, we can't do that with every individual employer, but what we can do is go to people that have a lot of visibility, like our elected officials, and help them understand and appreciate the role of our members. And so that lies at the core of what IFMA does as a professional association and the goal of our government affairs activities. And as part of that effort, we do work actively in a number of coalitions, both in the U.S. and globally, working with related organizations like ASHRAE and BOMA and USGBC, because many times we have similar priorities, we have similar ways of talking about things, and we want to share information. And to the extent that we can all work in the same direction and support the same initiatives, it really does increase the likelihood of success for anything that we're working on. IFMA has been fortunate that we have been very successful in the work that we have done in Washington and globally over the years. Basically, every 2 years, IFMA has supported or been part of a major piece of legislation. Everything from the Federal Buildings Personnel Training Act, which we passed almost 15 years ago, which underscored the role and importance of education training and improving the value and performance of federal facilities, to just last year, when we supported passage of the Carper Water Resources Development Act, which provided reforms in how the federal government maintains and disposes of its property, including a focus on space utilization rates, facility condition indexes, and other metrics when making disposal decisions. So oftentimes, the work we do from a government affairs perspective seems somewhat abstract. It's always good to know that the work we're doing does have an impact, that our elected officials are listening, and it's a good reminder of how important it is for IFMA members to be engaged in the process, to let their elected officials know who they are, that they are the district, they are running buildings in the district that are the backbone of the economy, and that they do want to be engaged in the process. As I mentioned, IFMA has a large and ever-growing number of federal partners. We work very closely with the U.S. Department of State, the Architect of the Capitol, the General Services Administration, Department of Labor, Department of Veterans Affairs, and this is just the work we're doing on the federal level. This cascades down to the state and local level as well, where I know a number of our chapters, where I know a number of our individual members are either working for or working with government entities, whether it be a State Department of General Services or a public utility of some sort. It's great to see the engagement from public sector partners and to be able to be a resource for them in the work that they're doing in public sector buildings. In addition to the federal partners that we have, I did mention we have a number of coalitions and industry advisory boards that IFMA participates on. Most recently, IFMA became a commissioner on the UN Commission on Indoor Air Quality. Indoor air quality, as we'll talk a bit about more this morning, is an increasingly important issue in the post-COVID environment. People have heightened standards and heightened awareness of the air quality in their building, and we want to make sure that we're providing a clean, healthy, and safe environment for them. In that effort, we're working with ASHRAE and the Well Building Institute, as well as a couple other partners. We're also active in the High Performance Building Congressional Caucus. That was a group that IFMA had founded more than a decade ago. We were fortunate to serve both as policy chair and past chair of that organization and to continue to be actively engaged there. Within that umbrella organization, we work on state advocacy issues, and then we also work on indoor air quality issues. Additionally, we're working with the Building Action Network, where we were a founding member, the Healthy Buildings Coalition, where we're an executive committee member, and in Europe, we're a part of 2 additional coalitions and campaigns. Before we get into the meat of what we're working on here in Washington, I did want to take a step back and provide a little bit of political context. I always remind people that IFMA is not a political organization. We don't support one party or another. We're in favor of good, common sense public policy, and IFMA works with both sides of the aisle and both parties in order to accomplish that. That said, it is important to understand kind of which way the political winds are blowing in Washington, D.C. It certainly helps understand some of the issues we're having in getting both houses of Congress to work together. Just the one takeaway I would give you from the 2024 election is that we do have Republican control of all 3 branches of government right now. But in the House in particular, that control is very narrow. Less than half a dozen seats is the margin of control. When you have 435 members of Congress, you have 435 different opinions. And when you only have a single vote majority, it makes it very tough to get things done. On top of that, in the Senate, we have the filibuster rule and requirement that they need 60 votes in order to basically stop debate and pass major pieces of legislation. Right now, Republicans only have 55. So even though theoretically they're in control, they're far from having the supermajority they need to get things done. And so with that, let me invite Brian to give a little context as to what's going on in Congress, what we're seeing, and how that's impacting the way things are working in Washington.
Thanks, JJ. That's a great overview so far. So moving from the election in 2024, I'll touch briefly on the off-year elections. This is the Virginia, New Jersey General Assembly elections, and then the elections for the governor's race there, and then most recently a special election in Tennessee. What we've seen is essentially in especially Virginia, but also in New Jersey, not only the governorship, but the margins of seats pickups by the Democrats and the assemblies for both of those states increased as they will in off-year elections and in next fall's midterm elections for the full House and a third of the Senate. But it seemed especially high turn in Virginia. So that's something politically, I think, to keep an eye on in terms of the voter sentiment. This also happened, of course, during the last 2 weeks of the government shutdown. So how that played into it, especially in Virginia, with a number of federal government employees that may or may not have been laid off or worked without pay for the past several weeks, may have factored into that. The Tennessee special election, the Republican won that. But the margin from which that Republican won a relatively safe seat in the House of Representatives was 10 points less than President Trump had won in the 2024 election. So the Republicans are looking at generally so far shrinking margins, even in areas of victory, and Democrats are looking at increasing margins in the districts and regions in which they're currently at. So that's politically the latest things that have kind of happened election-wise. Right now, we're looking at a government continuing resolution that goes for most of the agencies outside of a couple until January 30th. So at that point, either another continuing resolution or full-year appropriations for FY26 are going to need to be completed by Congress. What's the sticking point? It's actually the same sticking point that was there before the shutdown occurred. A lot of this is focused on the ACA, Affordable Care Act, Obamacare subsidy payments scheduled to expire at the end of this year. 1 month prior to the government itself shutting down. Discussions are going on now between both House and Senate leadership about how to address those, or to address them either prior or as part of an agreement on a broader continuing resolution that would reach past January 30th. The Senate is looking at a vote on a potential 3-year extension that's expected to fail. The House is looking at a shorter extension and also incorporating some of President Trump's health savings accounts options for residents. So still have no real clarity on where it's going, but they know it's urgent. I don't think either party wants to see a shutdown happen. Again, the Republicans, there's a bit of tension in the House. A lot of the House Republicans members are not only affected by the potential and already increasing healthcare costs, but have seen the impacts of some of the tariffs on their businesses. And in the farm ag community, seen lessened exports due to tariffs put on their products by other countries. So these things are kind of floating together as we look at who will be running in the midterm elections. We've seen a handful of Republicans and Democrats announce retirements in the House and Senate. That's expected to pick up here in the next 30 days with announcements of retirements and choices not to run for re-election. In most cases, those deciding not to run for re-election, whether they're running for office or just resigning from running for a different office like governorship or separate from that, what we've seen is they're generally safe seats that they're leaving so far. That is bound to change. Those retirement announcements are going to eventually merge into some more of the competitive districts, particularly on the House side. And on top of that, we're looking at where redistricting stands in about 6 or 7 seats prior to the midterm elections in November, which could change the landscape of the House for the next decade. So every state is on a slightly different path there. So a lot going on. And as we kind of look at the politics, the elections, and who's going to be in charge, obviously keeping in mind how we continue to best position IFMA before the federal agencies and in the congressional committees of jurisdiction, which I know JJ and Scott Dacey and I constantly think about in the back of our minds.
Brian, that's great. And let me just kind of summarize that for everybody. It's a complicated situation. It's about to get more complicated, I think is the best way to describe it. We're in the midst of the holiday season here in Washington. There are multiple parties almost every night. The hope is that elected officials and staff get together and maybe have a drink or two and maybe hammer out some compromises. The reality is more likely a lot like our familiar situations where someone may have a drink or two and say something or do something that's really going to make the other side upset. So all things are possible here in Washington during the holiday season as we try to hammer out a compromise and hopefully avoid another government shutdown here in Washington, D.C. Just a reminder, we have gone through a lot of content already, and we're going to go through some more. We're happy to stop and take questions from anybody who's listening. So please drop a question into the chat, and Brian and I will stop and try to address that. But to Brian's point, obviously, we have a very fluid situation here in Washington. We have Republican control of the 3 chambers, as I mentioned. I typically show a slide of how a bill is supposed to become a law, of going through the committee process and being signed by the president. But in the reality, the way that we're working right now, congressional realities and how a bill becomes a law is much different. And in fact, apart from the big, beautiful bill, we've not seen a lot of individual pieces of legislation move through this Congress. What we saw is the one bill that was passed using the reconciliation process. That's a budget tool that basically requires only 50 votes in the Senate. It doesn't require that supermajority I mentioned earlier, so it makes it easier to pass legislation. But so aside from that, we've seen a tremendous amount of activity in terms of executive authority. If you turn on the news basically any day, you'll see a picture or video of President Trump in the White House signing an executive order on something or other. I think he signed nearly 100 executive orders his first day, almost 200 in his first week. And this is the trend that we've seen continue throughout the first year of his presidency. That is a bit problematic for a couple reasons. One, there is some question as to the legality of some of these executive orders. Many of them are being challenged in court. And regardless of the legality of some of these orders, much of what he has done through executive authority can be overturned if there is a president from a different party or even a president with different opinions that comes in after President Trump. So that's just the reality of doing things from an executive order perspective. One of the other things we've been seeing is a fair amount of oversight from congressional committees in particular. They're always eager to look into the hot button issues of the day, whether it was the Jeffrey Epstein files, as we've seen a lot of conversation about, or actions by the previous administration. Should one or either the House or the Senate flip in the next election, that oversight prerogative and responsibility then would shift to the Democratic Party, who certainly would have a lot of interest and a lot of concerns about the way that Trump has managed himself and managed the administration in the first term here. So just things to keep in mind. Against that kind of semi-political backdrop, we did want to give an overview of what IFMA has been working on in the 119th Congress. As I mentioned, one of the things we try to do each and every year when we have new members of Congress come in, we have new committee chairs and ranking members, is we always try to come in and make sure we introduce IFMA and FM. We do this with almost all the newly elected members of Congress, and then we do this with the committees that have particular jurisdiction for IFMA, whether that's transportation infrastructure on the House side or the Public Building Subcommittee on the House side. We work with the Energy and Public Works Committee on the Senate side, just making sure that key decision makers know about the organization and know about the role of our members. We want to make sure we're building relationships with decision makers and positioning our members as subject matter experts. In terms of specific legislation, we're working on passing additional federal property reform, and I'll go into all this in greater detail, working on indoor air quality legislation. We've been supporting the Energy Star program, which I know is important to a lot of you, raising awareness about the state of commercial real estate, and then, of course, encouraging members of Congress to join the caucuses and coalitions where we participate, as well as using IFMA chapters as a resource. And Brian, I may just ask you to kind of touch on the importance of reaching out to members of Congress proactively and really positioning the organization in a positive light.
Yeah, that's a great point, JJ. So that is critically important. So, and I'll just use the examples of the fly-ins, and unfortunately, as JJ mentioned, we couldn't do that this year because of the shutdown. But in previous years, when members come into town, they're meeting with staff and sometimes members, and members are speaking, and they know about IFMA, and they know about IFMA because you're providing your outreach, we're providing our outreach, and we're being proactive. So it's not just a one-time conversation; it's a discussion about. Thank you for joining the High Buildings Performance Caucus. Also, this is the bills that they are in support of. This is what we're supporting, and it's a lot easier to get co-sponsors for the legislation that way, to meet kind of a critical mass, either for a House proceeding or a House vote, or to get a committee consideration in some of the committees that we work with within the space of the built environment. So absolutely critical, and really looking forward to the fly-in this Congress here, or this second half of this Congress, and hoping everybody that wants to can make it in when that's scheduled.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate that. And as I mentioned before we jump to the conversation about federal real estate, a lot of what has happened in this administration has been done by executive order. You may remember that Trump established right out the Department of Government Efficiency. This was something that had some impacts for IFMA and FM, because one of the things they did initially was they worked with the General Services Administration and basically targeted almost 500 federal facilities for closure, terminated a number of leases, and then terminated a number of contracts that they had with FM service providers that were running federal buildings. Fortunately, there was some fairly significant backlash to that, particularly with regard to disposal of those 500 excess properties. And so that is now running through a more rigorous and open process where IFMA and other organizations will have the opportunity to provide feedback. Federal property has been an important issue for IFMA for a number of years, more than anything because the federal government is the largest property owner in the world. They own and operate more than 500,000 facilities worldwide. Many of those buildings are vacant or they're underutilized. Even before the COVID and before COVID and the pandemic, there were problems in federal real estate. There were too many vacancies. The federal government was operating and maintaining empty buildings while they were leasing buildings in the same space. The problems just got that much worse with COVID. Fortunately, the problem has gotten so bad that a number of members of Congress and the administration have gotten really serious about trying to address the problem. And so there have been a number of proposals that have been put forward to address the backlog of excess federal real estate and to come forward with a more workable solution moving forward. And this is something that IFMA is very supportive of. And one of the reasons we're optimistic that something can get done now is we've helped establish this Public Buildings Reform and Savings Board. This is an independent entity that's supposed to go through the whole of the federal real estate portfolio and look for opportunities for savings. This is something that IFMA helped establish. This is an idea that we've long supported, more than anything, because we believe that federal buildings should be an example of best practices with regard to operations and maintenance and not a glaring example of waste. And we think there are opportunities to do that. More than anything, there are opportunities here because the value proposition is so large. If you look at how much money the federal government spends on buildings they're not going to use, just in terms of O&M, the numbers are staggering. And so if we can save that money, if we can reprogram that money, it'll not only make government for the taxpayer, but also make federal buildings much more livable, much more workable, a much better places to visit. We're seeing tremendous pressure from Congress on this in terms of budgets. They're really cracking down on how agencies are spending money and looking for areas where there's waste. And then the final reason for optimism, this has actually become a bipartisan issue because a lot of the major cities in the country that have vacant or underutilized federal buildings have been reaching out to Congress, been reaching out to the administration and saying, hey, if you're not going to use this building, can we please take it off your hands? Can we get it onto our tax rolls? Can we redevelop it so it is a more of a draw than kind of a blight on the community where it's housed? And so we are encouraged to see that. Probably the most visible example we've seen of that is in D.C., where Mayor Muriel Bowser had been a vocal supporter of President Trump's efforts to realign the federal building portfolio, to get rid of underutilized buildings and bring people back into the office full time. As I mentioned, one of the things we had supported in the last Congress was the Carper Water Resources Development Act. This had a couple provisions that were particularly exciting. One that talked about space utilization rates. This was a metric that we've been talking about for a number of years up on Capitol Hill, which members of Congress finally began to understand. For many, many years, the federal real property profile basically contained the address of a federal agency and who the owner was, as well as a listing of the square footage. It made no mention of how many people were working in the building, what the space utilization rate was, or what the facility condition index was. And thanks to the Carper Water Resources Development Act, agencies now have to track their space utilization rates as well as their facility condition indexes, and that information will be fed into a larger database that will be used to inform federal property disposal decisions. So very encouraged to see some forward progress on federal property. We are hopeful that we can get some additional federal property bills passed before the end of this Congress. And Brian, that's actually a good kind of segue into what do you see as the timeline here for the remainder of this Congress, and how realistic is it to get things done in the next 6 to 8 months?
Well, that's a great question. I think we'll know more once we get it. Once we get through the funding shutdown, potential funding shutdown debate January 30th, which I do feel like they will get through it. This week and next, they're on the National Defense Authorization Act, which is considered in any Congress the largest must pass annual bill that goes through. And as part of that, we've seen more and more non-defense related topics and items either pushed in through the base text or through amendments. The House Rules Committee is meeting at 4 p.m. to decide how the amendments will be debated on the floor, and have listed 14 amendments now, but I expect dozens more to be on their website by the end of today. So we're going to get through the NDAA. The President Trump, once it's sent to him, will sign that. We'll look at the funding, and then we'll take a look at some of the larger larger bills, some of the less controversial bills, and some of those that IFMA supports, and to see in that second half of looking at probably February to, I would say realistically, end of June as the prime time for activity for legislation to pass. If committees need to consider the bills and get them to the floor of the House or the Senate, that's the time to do it. The earlier, the better. So we'll be keeping an eye on all of these bills to see if they head that way. Once you get past the end of June, you're headed July 4th recess. You've got a few weeks in July, and then when you're at August, most folks in the House, anyways, and a good part of the Senate are back home campaigning for the November election. So the timeline in the second year of any congressional session is compressed for sure, and you're looking at about 4 to 5 months of real working time for the members to address legislation specifically.
Yeah, that's great, Brian, and thank you. It's good to remember that while the clock is certainly ticking, there is an opportunity to get things done. The federal buildings issue is one that we'll certainly continue to hammer away at. We're working on supporting additional federal real property legislation, working on continued reforms to the federal buildings portfolio. One of the things in particular is we need to create an incentive for agencies to get rid of excess buildings. We feel like if they can retain some portion of the proceeds of the sale from their excess buildings, it may create an additional incentive for them. And the other thing, and one of the major problems we're seeing right now, particularly with relation to GSA, is right now they just don't have the money to address their maintenance backlog. If they could get greater access to the federal buildings fund, right now, many agencies pay GSA basically as their landlord, and the money they're paying that should go to take care of these buildings is being reprogrammed, being sent to other places. So I always say it's like being a tenant in the building, and you're paying your monthly home ownership fees or homeowners association dues, but they're taking that money and spending it in somebody else's building. Not really fair to the tenant, and certainly in this case, one of the reasons we continue to see a maintenance backlog in federal buildings. But as I said, there are reasons for optimism here. We are getting a lot done, and we're going to continue to really press Congress and the administration for the remainder of the year and next year as well. Some of the other hot button issues that we're working on, indoor air quality has become particularly important within the built environment. As I mentioned, IFMA is a commissioner to the UN Commission on Indoor Air Quality globally. We're working with an indoor air quality group in Europe and working with a state and local indoor air quality group here in the US. I think since COVID, people have really thought a lot more about their indoor environmental health and quality. And one of the reasons we typically hear for people who may be reluctant to come back to the office full time is they worry about their health and safety when they come in. So we think if we can make some additional investments in indoor air quality monitoring and then improving the overall indoor air quality environment, that will certainly help address those issues. So we are working on a number of bills with members of both the House and Senate that will improve indoor air quality in schools and public buildings. We're working on the Indoor Air Quality and Healthy Schools Act, which would ensure that the EPA has authority and the resources it needs to better protect public health from poor indoor air quality. Specifically, the bill expands and updates codes with relation to EPA's Indoor Air Quality Division. It requires the EPA to establish and regularly update a list of significant indoor contaminants. These are the things that we should be tracking or monitoring within the built environment. It directs the EPA to develop or recognize one or more voluntary certifications for buildings designed or built. Basically, what are the best practices that are out there and how should we be utilizing them? And then the particular focus is actually on indoor air quality in schools, particularly in older or aging buildings. We find that indoor air quality has a significant impact on the health, safety, and productivity of children. And the more we're learning about this, the more we learn we really need to do something. So this is something that IFMA has signed on to support. A number of the coalitions that we work within are supporting this effort, and we think that indoor air quality is an important issue moving forward. Another issue I'll flag for everybody is the Energy Star program. This is one that you may be familiar with for both either personal consumption or for commercial consumption as well. For many years, I think this program was established under George W. Bush almost 25 years ago, so it's a bipartisan program. This is a program run through the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, which basically provides an efficiency rating for certain commercial and consumer products. This is something that was targeted by the Trump administration, basically to get rid of the program. But because there was so much bipartisan support for it, they have agreed to move the program from EPA to the Department of Energy. The only problem that we're running into with that move is that taking it from EPA to the Department of Energy requires an additional appropriation. As Brian alluded to, we have not passed an appropriations bill for this year, particularly one that funds the Department of Energy. We are hopeful that that's something that's addressed when they do a final bill at the end of January. But we have seen good support from Congress for preserving the Energy Star program. We are confident that even if we don't get a specific energy and water appropriations bill, that Congress will continue to fund the Energy Star program. We've heard whispers from people at the Department of Energy that they are reaching out to staff, that they are retaining staff that are supervising the program, and are very confident that this program, one that's very important for IFMA and for the built environment, will continue as well. And Brian, let me just stop there. And if you want to touch on how the appropriations process will impact things for next year.
Yeah, so there are three right now, military construction, VA, and I think one other agency that got full year funding for FY26. Everybody else is on a continuing resolution, as JJ mentioned. Continuing resolutions while keeping government operations, buildings, and everything open from that, and getting full year appropriations and direction on how to spend money and permissions to spend money in certain programs, Energy Star and other, is really important. So the hope is that even if they do another short-term resolution, CR, another short-term CR into beyond January 30th, so the government shutdown doesn't occur, that they actually do the appropriations bills, because that's the policy directives that will impact a wide range of IFMA facility management and building related issues. And you really need that direction from Congress when you're looking to advance some of your policies on the Hill. So that's the hope, is that they actually get that done. They're running into a bit of a time crunch with the NDAA, which is going to take up this week and probably a bit of next. And then before you know it, they're closing out for the year end holidays and into New Year, and then they're back here in the middle of the first week of January. So they've got to kind of push through that, and then get to actually funding the agencies with directives and direction from the policymakers. And that's part of our push on the Hill right now, is to see that gets done rather than just relying on these continual CRs. Let's see. I don't see JJ on the screen. He may have a connection problem there. But no,
Yep, there I am. Sorry, guys.
No,
my connection faded all of a sudden, but I'm back here. But no, thank you, Brian, for that. And that's helpful to understand. And I always think it's somewhat ironic that, without appropriations bills for this year, they're basically just funding the government at the previous levels. And these were all policies and funding that was enacted during the Biden administration. So you have a Republican Congress, you have a Republican White House, basically funding programs at levels that were decided by a Democratic president. So a little interesting there.
Yep, absolutely.
Yep. So just a couple other things here. We feel good about federal real estate. We feel good about indoor air quality. Feel good about Energy Star. One of the issues we continue to highlight is just the state of the commercial building sector. As many of you are aware, we've seen a return to office, certainly since COVID, but maybe not the numbers that people were expecting. We are still seeing impacts from kind of the post-COVID remote work and things like that in the commercial real estate sector and how people are working. Investors and banks are a little worried that some areas of commercial real estate may not recover. There's worry about the money in commercial real estate loans that are coming due, and as I mentioned with federal real estate, there's some concern about buildings, particularly in major metropolitan markets that are underutilized or vacant right now, and the impact that has on the tax base and crime and things of that sort. So more than anything, we just want to highlight this for members of Congress and let them know that there are some issues still within the commercial real estate sector that can be addressed, incentivizing reinvestment in commercial buildings in particular. One of the trends that we've seen is that, the Class A spaces are always going to be full. Particularly the greenest and the cleanest spaces are always going to be full. It's those B and C level buildings that really are struggling at times to get people back in. So to the extent that we can provide incentives to redevelop or reinvest in those, we want to make sure that we're doing this and let them know that that's an opportunity not only for job creation, but to really spur growth in a lot of cities that perhaps have seen a decline since COVID. So something that we'll continue to keep on our radar here. One thing for you guys to keep in mind, particularly as you're thinking about how do you reach out to a member of Congress and how do you work with them, what are the impacts that you're seeing from commercial real estate vacancies in your area? Um, if there's some visual impacts, examples that you can provide, this is something that we can certainly utilize, particularly as we're supporting revitalizing downtowns and looking at additional solutions or incentives. In addition to the kind of four core policy areas that I identified, there are a number of other areas that we're working on, either independently or part of the various coalitions that we're working on. Everything from the Healthy Water Act that was contained in the Farm Bill, Water Conservation Act, codes and standards, workforce development, and job training programs. These are all things that are important for IFMA. If we had another 4 or 5 hours, I could go through every piece of legislation that we're working on, but I don't think we have time for that today. But if there's an area of particular interest for you, please let us know. The one thing that I will flag within this is workforce development. This is something that has been a priority issue for the Trump administration, really focused on getting people back into the building trades, making sure that, as we're building the economy of the future, that we have the workforce that can support that. One of the great ironies that we've seen and heard as we talk about AI and how AI is going to impact um, the jobs of the future is that right now we don't have the workforce to build and maintain all of these data centers that we're going to need to power an AI economy. And everyone from the CEO of NVIDIA to the CEO of Home Depot has said we need to get people back into a lot of these in-demand jobs. They're high paying, you can't send them offshore, and they're not going to be replaced by AI. So this is something where we think this conversation is good for IFMA and good for the FM sector because we want to bring people back in the workforce sector. Not just FMs, but all the FM service providers that are working for our members. We want to provide incentives to bring people in here, train them up, and set them on a path to success. And we do feel confident that this administration is going to continue to invest in that, and this is something that IFMA could take advantage of as well. So the final question here as we're wrapping up, and I realize we're going to run out of time. It's important for IFMA members to really know how they can be involved in this process, and this is something that we're largely going to cover in more detail in our next webinar. Today was to give you a sense as to what are the policy areas that we're working on. The next section in this is going to be how do you get engaged, and that begins with how do you find your member of Congress, and the answer to that is pretty easy. If you go to house.gov or senate.gov and put in your home address and your zip code, it will come up with your member of Congress. I would certainly encourage you to do that. You can go onto their website. You can see the issues that they're working on. You can see the committees where they have jurisdiction. And you can also sign up for email newsletters and things of that sort, learn about local events. And I would encourage you to do that. It's good to know who your member of Congress is, but it's better for them to know who you are. And so please, if you have the time, go to house or senate.gov and try to figure out who your member of Congress is. Second thing, as I mentioned, this is going to be a series of events that we're doing. We're going to have 3 or 4 webinars in the new year. So hopefully you found today's webinar informative and giving you a little taste of what you can expect in the next session. So I would encourage you to do that as well. We are going to have an advocacy session at World Workplace and at Facility Fusion. So if this is something you're interested in learning more about, please consider attending one of those as well. And then finally, register for Advocacy Day. It should say 2026, not 2025. I apologize. We will have details out about that in the coming weeks. So hopefully you and your chapter will participate in that event, learn more about what you can do from a state and local level to get engaged, and how you and your chapter could be effective advocates for FM. And so with that, I realize we've covered a fair amount of material in a relatively short period of time. Brian, any closing thoughts about the importance of advocacy or getting engaged?
No, it's well. First of all, thank you all for joining, and it's absolutely important. Whether it's one of the advocacy webinars that IFMA hosts, or whether it's coming into town when we set up the next fly-in, please consider joining us. You know, JJ mentioned at the end there, you know, workforce development, and that's across fields. So, you know, it could be anywhere from warehousing to manufacturing to facility management. Um, the tax bill that was passed expanded the eligibility of spending funds from traditional college universities of 529s. In Virginia, it's a 529. In your state, it may be called something different. And expanding the eligibility of those uses to, you know, practical, you know, right to work training environments. So many different elements touching the built environment. You know, HVAC. You know, heating, cooling, all of the electronics involved with operating a building that are different now than they were 5 years ago, or even, and especially 10 or 15 years before that. So, you know, as we go into 2026, we'll be, obviously talking with JJ Moore and continuing our work and kind of thinking about how some of that might play into, promotion of using some of those funds for those not going to a traditional university or college and would rather go right to work and be trained and specialized and sought after in a range of fields related to the built environment. So we'll be looking at that as well. But it's a nice opening of a use for funds for an area that needs workers. And like I said, it's in the built environment and it's across the workforces in the U.S.
Yep. Thank you, Brian. Great point to end on. Just two more housekeeping issues, if I can. The next webinar, which will be focused on local advocacy, will be January 28th. You can look for additional information and a registration link after this webinar. And then finally, if you have any questions after we drop off here, please feel free to reach me anytime. My email is jjohnson@ifma.org. If you have any questions about advocacy, about how you can get involved, or what your chapter can do, please reach out to me. I'm happy to be a resource for you, happy to facilitate your engagement. So thank you for being with us here today. Thank you for your interest. Hope everyone has a very happy holiday and a good new year, and look forward to working with everyone in 2026.